What is the wise thing for me to do? I told you last week to start asking that question so that you can find wisdom, and when wisdom is found, life will abound. Well, stick around today as we talk about what life looks like when wisdom is not found. I remember the first time that I flew on an airplane. I was actually a college student, and I was going on a mission trip. And we were going to fly from Baltimore, Washington International Airport to Reykjavik, Iceland. It's a 6-hour flight from BWI to Reykjavik. And I remember leading up to that trip, I just started to get more and more anxious as the time drew near, and because I was just afraid of flying on an airplane. And I remember the day in which I walked onto the airplane, the first time that I ever took an airplane flight, and when I got on the plane, I put my bag in the overhead bin, sat down in my seat, and the very first thing I did was I buckled the seatbelt. And after everybody got on the plane, of course, if you've ever rode on an airplane, you know what happens. The flight attendant got in front of everybody and was giving the safety demonstration, explaining what would happen if cabin pressure would drop and how the oxygen mask would drop out and you were to put them on your face, what to do if the captain were to turn on the fasten seatbelt sign, what we were to do in case the plane would hit turbulence, and even talked about how our seat could be a flotation device and how you were to open the exit in case of an emergency. And she was going through all of the safety procedures, and I was sitting there and I was hanging on every word that she was saying, because I thought, if this plane goes down, I want to know exactly what I'm supposed to do. But as the flight attendant was going through the safety procedure, and as I was listening, I began to look around at the other passengers on the airplane, and what I discovered was that most of the people, if not all of the other people on the airplane, were ignoring everything the flight attendant was talking about. They weren't paying attention. I remember one guy was sitting there and he was reading the newspaper. I looked at a lady and she was digging through her bag trying to find something. And there was actually a guy who was just a row or so ahead of me, and he was already asleep. And I just remember thinking, if this airplane goes down, I thought, they better not ask me what to do. And so many times in our life, we go through life the same way, where there's a lot of wisdom and there's a lot of instruction that's available to us, but for the most part, we walk through life just simply ignoring wisdom or allowing wisdom to fall on deaf ears. Now, I started this series last week entitled Wisdom for Life, and we've been looking at different passages throughout the book of Proverbs. And if you remember last week, I gave you the take-home truth for that message, but also for all of these messages as we work through the book of Proverbs. And that is, when wisdom is found, life will abound. When you and I discover the wise thing to do in our relationships, when we discover the wise thing to do with our finances, when we discover the wise thing to do morally or ethically or even physically in our lives, what we discover is that our life flourishes as a result. And last week, I encouraged you to ask the question, when you're faced with these situations in your life where it may not be wrong, but you realize it may not be all right. And I encourage you to ask the question, what is the wise thing for me to do? In light of my past, in light of my present, in light of my future, what is the wise thing for me to do? And it may be unwise for you to do a certain thing, but it may not be unwise for your neighbor to do that same thing. So what is the wise thing for you to do? And this is what I know about all of us. One thing that every single person has in common is that we all have regrets. We all have those moments in our life financially. We have those moments in our life relationally. We have those moments in our life vocationally. When we look back on those moments in our life, they're oftentimes filled with great regret. And we oftentimes ask ourselves, why did I do that? And many times it comes down to the fact that we just simply ignored wisdom. Either we either didn't know what the wise thing to do. Maybe we knew what the wise thing to do was, but we just didn't care what the wise thing was. Or maybe we were resistant to just do the wise thing. But the truth is that there are many times in our lives that all of us live unwisely, in times that we make unwise decisions. And so the take-home truth that I want to give you today is this, is that when wisdom is neglected, trouble is to be expected. And you know that. You know those times in your life when you neglected the wise thing and you neglected to do the wise thing. And what happened was you encountered trouble. You made a mess in your life. You made a mess in the life of people around you, all because you did what was unwise. And what we're going to discover today is that wisdom is not really a head issue. It's not an intellectual issue. Wisdom is a heart issue. And if we would get our hearts right towards wisdom, we would learn the wise things to do, and we would live with fewer regrets in our lives. And you know this. You know people in your life that are extremely intelligent, very smart people that just seem to do unwise things. And when wisdom is neglected, trouble is to be expected. And that's exactly what Solomon addresses here in Proverbs chapter 1. In Proverbs chapter 1, Solomon actually gave the whole purpose of writing this book of Proverbs. If you look at chapter 1, verse 1, it says this: the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. And he says this is the reason why he wrote these: for attaining wisdom and discipline, for understanding words of insight, for acquiring a disciplined and prudent life. He says, I want you to live wisely so that you can attain wisdom. And when you attain wisdom, you're going to understand words. You're going to acquire a disciplined and a prudent life. And so his desire was for his sons, and by extension, all the people that would follow after them. His desire was that you and I would live wisely. However, Solomon understood that there are people who just decide to live unwisely. And here at the end of Proverbs chapter 1, Solomon gives us just a picture of those people who live unwisely. If you look at chapter 1, verse 20, it says, wisdom calls aloud in the street. She raises her voice in the public squares. At the head of the noisy streets, she cries out. In the gateways of the city, she makes her speech. Now, Solomon points out all the different places where wisdom is crying out. And it's almost like Solomon is saying, at the crossroads of all the aspects of life, at the crossroads of government and business and arts and entertainment and sports, at the crossroads of all of these things, wisdom is crying out. She cries in the street, in the public square, in the noisy streets, at the gateways. She is pleading her case. And the reason why Solomon makes this point is because you know this, is that you and I need wisdom in the very practical times of life, where we live and where we work and where we're entertained, that you and I need wisdom in those places. And here Solomon is telling us that wisdom is shouting out. It may be warnings that wisdom is shouting. Wisdom may be shouting instructions, or wisdom may be shouting direction, but wisdom is shouting out in all of these places. However, the tragedy is that most of these words of wisdom are just falling on deaf ears. And what Solomon shows us here is that when wisdom is neglected, trouble is to be expected. So Solomon writes here in the next verse and gives us examples of people who live unwisely. And what we see here is wisdom's absence, the people who just lack wisdom in their lives. Now, as we look at these three categories of people, I know the natural tendency is to think about others in our life where, boy, I really wish my son would listen to this, or my boss really needs to hear this, or my neighbor really needs to practice wisdom in their life. And so, but I don't want you to think about the other people who need to hear this. I want you to think about times in your life and areas of your life where maybe you're acting unwisely and wisdom is absent in your life. And so in verse 22, he tells us, he says, how long will you simple ones love your simple ways? How long will mockers delight in mockery and fools hate knowledge? The first person that Solomon talks about here that lacks wisdom is the simple. He says, how long will you simple ones love your simple ways? That word simple just means to be naive or to be easily led astray. I mean, you and I would say today, this is the type of person who is clueless. Now, the simple person it's not that they're resistant to wisdom, it's just that they lack the experience. They just have not yet grown up. And so here he talks about this simple person, and the simple person is not dumb, they're not evil, they just lack experience. And it's almost as if they just don't know what they don't know. And they just lack that experience. And oftentimes we see this in the lives of our teenagers. I remember when I worked at the school in North Carolina, and every time I would have the opportunity to stand before our high school, I would always encourage them. I always talk to them about wisdom. And I would always say something like this. I would say, I realize right now, your parents and your teachers and the adults in your life, they don't have a clue. And I would always say, because I remember when I was your age, when I was 15, 16, 17, 18 years of age, my parents didn't know anything. But what I discovered was in about 10 years, when I got to be about 25, 26, 27 years old, my parents learned a whole lot in that time. Now, it's not my parents learned anything, it's that I recognized that I was a simple person. And that's the truth about the simple person. The simple person doesn't even realize, they don't recognize, they won't admit that they're simple, because a simple person, when they recognize it, when they admit that they're simple, that's the moment that they stop being simple. They stop being naive. They stop being easily led astray. And Solomon talks about the simple person in Proverbs chapter 22. In Proverbs chapter 22, verse 3, Solomon says this. He says, a wise man sees danger and takes refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. He says, the wise man's able to look down the road. And they look down the road, they see what is coming. And what the wise person will do, because they see what's coming down the road, they're going to protect themselves from what's going to happen. But he says the simple person walks along, they have no idea what's down the road, and they keep going, and he says they suffer harm. You see, the simple person, this is why simple people usually react this way. If you have a teenager, they've probably said these things before, where you try to give them wisdom, you try to give them direction, and they say, oh, don't worry, nothing will happen to me, because they can't see the danger. But the wise person knows what can happen to them. That's why a simple person will say, why are you worried about it? I can handle it. And the wise person knows that the world is filled with people who couldn't handle it. Or, the simple person will say to you, why are you overreacting? To which the wise person says, because I know the consequences. But the simple person doesn't see it, and so they keep on going. And so if you're watching, and I would say if you are under the age of 25, you are probably simple. Now, I don't mean that as a disparaging comment, but the fact is that you just don't have the experience. But the good thing is that God has placed people in your life, people who have the experience, people who have walked the path, wise people who can see what has happened. We oftentimes use the phrase live and learn, and you and I have many people in our lives who've lived and they have learned. Many times they learned from their biggest regrets. They've learned from the mistakes that they've made in the past. And now armed with that experiences, they can see the consequences of decisions that you're making. They can see what is down the road and trying to protect you from that harm. And instead of living and learning, you have the opportunity to learn and then live. I'm sure you've heard the phrase before, to be young and foolish. But today, you have the possibility to have the best of both worlds. You don't have to be young and foolish. You can be young and wise. Now, generally, if you're under the age of 25, there's many areas of your life where you're just simple. You just lack the experience. But there's other people, maybe you're over 25, and there's just areas of your life where you just don't have the experience. There's people who are just simple when it comes to relationships. There's people who are simple when it comes to finances. And just because they don't have the experiences, they're unable to see what is down the road. But when wisdom is neglected, trouble is to be expected. And what Solomon would encourage to you, he says here, how long will you simple ones love your simple ways? Stop being simple. Listen to the wisdom of your parents. Listen to the wisdom of the people that God has put in your life so that you don't have to suffer the regrets that come with living unwisely. The second person that Solomon talks about that I want to show you here today that lives without wisdom is the fool. You see, there's a difference between being a simple person and being a foolish person. The simple person is just simply unaware. They lack the experience. The fool, however, is the one who is aware but just doesn't care. The fool is the one who knows what the wise thing is, but they just ignore the wise thing because they don't care. If you look at the end of verse 22, Solomon said that. He said, fools hate knowledge. Now that word hate, of course, can be hate or to dislike something, but it's a word that was also translated to be the foe or the enemy of something. And what he's saying here, he's saying fools hate. They don't like wisdom, but not only that, they're an enemy. They actively resist. They are opposed to wisdom. They're the people that you will talk to and you say, don't you know the decisions that you're making are going to lead to regrets? Don't you know that the way in which you're living, the unwise choices that you're making are going to cause harm in your life? And they're the people that will look at you and say, I don't give a blank. And you can put in whatever wise word you want to put in the blank. But they're aware, but they just don't care. Listen to some verses that Solomon gave when he was talking about people who are fools. In Proverbs chapter 26, verse 11, he says, as a dog returns to its vomit. Now, I just want to stop there and think about that for a second. A dog vomits on the ground and that dog will come back and try to lap it up. And you're like, why are you doing that? But Solomon uses that as a great visual depiction. He says, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool continues in his folly. They're the people that you say to them, hey, don't you remember the last time you did this? Don't you remember what happened the last time you made this decision? Don't you remember how this worked out last time? And they're the people who say, yeah, I was there. Yeah, I lived it. I was there. And you know what? I don't care. And they usually respond something like this. I don't care. And it is my life. I don't care. And why do you care? Because it's my money. It's my relationship. I can do whatever I want because it is mine. And they continue to do the same foolish things over and over and over. Solomon also said in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 23, he says, the fool finds pleasure in evil conduct. You see, he says a fool enjoys making the unwise decisions. They don't want to stop doing it because it's too much fun. Here is the scary part about being a fool. Solomon said in Proverbs 13:20, a companion of fools suffers harm. This is why I freak out about the friends that my kids have. Because a fool is aware, but they just don't care. They'll be the ones who tell you, I just don't give a blank. You know, it's my body, it's my life, it's my money. I'm going to do whatever I want. Because the foolish person, in essence, is a selfish person. They don't care about the people around them. And if they don't care about themselves, they're not going to care about the people around them. And that's why Solomon says a companion of fools suffers harm, because a fool, it's more than just about them. When they act foolish, it's going to cause harm. It's going to cause damage to the people closest to them. It may cause damage to your spouse. Acting foolishly is going to cause damage to your children. Acting foolishly is going to cause damage to your parents, to your loved ones, to your friends, to your coworkers. And so that's why Solomon says, how long will fools hate knowledge? Now, just like the simple person, you may not be foolish in every area of your life, but you may be foolish in one area of your life. For instance, I know of a person who is very wise when it comes to finances, very financially wise. But they're a fool when it comes to their alcohol consumption. And it's caused damage to the people around them. I know of another person who is very wise vocationally. When it comes to their job, they are extremely wise. But they're a fool when it comes to relationships. And they've caused messes in their life and messes in in the lives of the people around them because they are a fool when it comes to relationships. Ask yourself, is there any area of my life where I'm acting as a fool? And this is how you can discover if you're a fool. When you know what you are doing is not the wise thing, and you go ahead and do it anyways. Or when you know that the consequences of the decision that you're about to make is going to be tragic, but you still do it anyways. Solomon says, you are a fool. And when wisdom is neglected, trouble is to be expected. It's going to come in your life. It's going to come into the lives of the people around you. But there's a third person that Solomon talks about that have an absence of wisdom. And if you look again at verse 22 in the middle of the verse, he says, how long will you simple ones love your simple ways? How long will mockers delight in mockery? Now, a mocker is a fool taken to the extreme. It's a fool on steroids. And if you have a boss who is a mocker, I feel sorry for you. If you're married to a person who is a mocker, my heart goes out to you. Because where the simple person is clueless, the foolish person is careless. But the mocker is ruthless. And the word that's translated here, mocker, is a word that was translated literally to make a face. The mocker is the one who is cynical and they're critical and they're condescending to the person who does the wise thing. And they don't want to do the wise thing, and they make fun of the person who does do the wise thing. The mocker is the one who may ridicule you because you don't go bar hopping every night with them. The mocker is the one who may belittle you or be condescending towards you because you realize it's not the wise thing to do to just sleep around and have sex with all kinds of different people. The mocker is the one who looks down on you because you believe it to be the wise thing to stay out of debt. And you don't need to drive the nicest car, but they're going to make fun of you because you don't drive the brand new car and you are out of debt. The mocker is the one who's going to make fun of you just because you believe it wise to attend church. And the tragedy of being around a mocker is this. If you look in Proverbs chapter 9, verses 7 and 8, Solomon said this, whoever corrects a mocker invites insult. Whoever rebukes a wicked man incurs abuse. Do not rebuke a mocker, or he will hate you. He says, when you try to give wisdom to a mocker, they're going to belittle you, they're going to besmirch you, they're going to ridicule you, they're going to insult you, they're going to hate you. Because a mocker wants nothing to do with the wise thing. And the only way for a mocker to obtain wisdom is I believe, for God to bring tragedy into their lives when it's almost too late. And so here Solomon tells us, he says, you got this, on one hand, you have the simple person who just doesn't get it. They're asking the question, I don't understand. The fool who just ignores the wise thing to do. They're aware, but they just don't care. And then you have the mocker who hates the wise thing and believes they're the smartest person in the room and you're stupid for just doing the wise thing. But the truth is that when wisdom is neglected, trouble is to be expected. The call of wisdom in these verses that we looked at, the heart of this call is how long? Wisdom is asking, how long, simple person, how long are you going to remain simple? Foolish person, how long are you going to remain a fool? Mocker, how long are you going to mock? How long? And it's almost as if wisdom is saying, aren't you tired yet? Listen, aren't you tired of living paycheck to paycheck? Aren't you tired of just one broken relationship after another? Aren't you tired of waking up every morning with a hangover? Aren't you tired of having to clean up and fix the messes in your life and the messes that you've created in the lives of the people around you? How long aren't you tired of these things? And that's what happens when wisdom is absent. But what Solomon says next is wisdom. He gives us wisdom's answer. If you look at verse 23, he says, if you had responded to my rebuke. That phrase can be boiled down to one word. Wisdom's answer is repent. If you have been living unwisely, repent. Repentance is just simply acknowledging and understanding you're heading in the wrong direction. And stop going in the wrong direction and turn around and start going back in the right direction. Repentance, when it comes to wisdom, is acknowledging that I'm going in the wrong direction. I'm making unwise decisions. I'm going to stop doing that and I'm going to start living wisely. If you're a simple person, it means acknowledging that you lack wisdom. If you're the fool, it means that you're gonna start caring about the decisions that you make. If you're a mocker, it means that you're going to admit that you're not the smartest person in the room. But here he says, if you had responded to my rebuke, if you had come to the point when you acknowledged, you admitted that you need wisdom. He says everything can change. If you look what he says, if you had responded to my rebuke, I would have poured out my heart to you and made my thoughts known to you. You have one more chance. Stop being simple and listen to wisdom. Stop being a fool and listen to wisdom. Stop being a mocker and listen to wisdom. And you will be glad that you did. Because when wisdom is neglected, listen, trouble is to be expected. You know that from your own life. But listen to how Solomon continues here. He says, but since you rejected me when I called and no one gave heed when I stretched out my hand. He said there are people who they just keep rejecting wisdom. They keep rejecting wisdom. They keep rejecting wisdom. And it gets to the point when they don't even recognize wisdom because they've rejected it so often. Since you rejected me when I called and no one gave heed when I stretched out my hand. Since you ignored all my advice and would not accept my rebuke. Listen to what wisdom says. I, in turn, will laugh at your disaster. I will mock when calamity overtakes you. When calamity overtakes you like a storm. When disaster sweeps over you like a whirlwind. When distress and trouble overwhelm you. He says, how long will you reject wisdom? How long will you live with the absence of wisdom in your life? And this prolonged refusal, it will lead to trouble. It's going to lead to one day when you experience the trouble in your life that it says that wisdom is going to laugh and mock at you. It's almost as if when the tragedy strikes because you acted unwisely, wisdom is sitting there with her arms folded looking at you and saying, I told you so. I told you so. But you would not listen. And don't miss what Solomon says in verses 26 and 27. 4 different times Solomon doesn't say if, He says when. When calamity overtakes you, when disaster sweeps over you, when distress and trouble overwhelm you, it's not a matter of if. When you're acting unwisely, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when trouble will come. Because when wisdom is neglected, trouble is to be expected.